Hello. The concept that we are going to talk about today, alienation from Marx, is a concept I think that all of us, each one of us taking this course or teaching this course, is going to relate to. I was watching a film called Zwigato yesterday about Zomato workers, and simultaneously I had just finished preparing for this lecture, and it appeared to me that gig work, for example, that we are surrounded by today, is a step ahead in alienation. There's not even the factory floor where everybody comes together to work, even as they work in their own individualized cells. And this is something that I want us to think about, not in today's lecture, where I largely introduce the concept, but in the subsequent classes and at some point in the discussions or tutorials. So let us begin with this very iconic clip from Charlie Chaplin's Modern Time. So it's a small 20-25 second clip. Let's watch it together. All right. I guess this was quite apparent, and you would have gotten a sense of what alienation refers to, like a general sense. Let's look at the theory behind it. I want to read out this one quote from the German ideology, where Marx is critiquing the idea that Adam Smith puts forth, even though he agrees with the notion that the division of labor brings about higher productivity, but he says that we are not looking at what else it does. What does it do to us as humans? So he writes, as soon as labor is distributed, each man has a particular exclusive sphere of activity, which is forced upon him and from which he cannot escape. He is a hunter, a fisherman, a shepherd, or a critical critic, and must remain so if he does not want to lose his means of livelihood. While in communist society, where nobody has one exclusive sphere of activity, but each can become accomplished in any branch he wishes, makes it possible for me to do one thing today, another tomorrow, to hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner, just as I have a mind, without ever becoming hunter, fisherman, shepherd, or critic. To not have to isolate yourself in one and rather be able to do a lot of different things that humans do. And Marx looks at human beings as that one species which has the power of consciousness and therefore is able to imagine, be creative, have play with ideas and work. So work is an integral part of what it means to be a human being from Marx's perspective. So going back to Hegel, and you cannot really study Marx without going back to Hegel, let's begin with how does Hegel understand the process of alienation. To Hegel, in the society that he is living in, alienation is has become an integral part of the human condition. It is the human condition. And he says, so he writes about it as a form of separation. He says that in the beginning there was totality or the absolute truth or the supreme. And this gets divided into the subject and the object. And this process, where there is the subject, that is I, who is conscious of themselves, views the outside world as an object that is different from me, this separation is what causes alienation. Hegel says that it is only by critically interrogating consciousness can we overcome this division and therefore this alienation. And by critically interrogating human consciousness, what he basically means is that at this moment, his human consciousness does not reflect human experience. So through self-conscious thought and reflection, can we overcome this duality and come to the unity or the totality or the absolute truth. So in Hegel's terms, one can overcome alienation through the mind, through thinking. This is very different from how Marx sees alienation, and he sees it so much more in the material realm, in the world of action, in the world of interrelationship and doing and materiality. Every time you're speaking of Hegel or Marx, we use the term idealist or materialist, but what do these terms mean? So when we use the term, if you believe that it is ideas that drive history, if it is ideas that bring us to action, then you would be an idealist. But if, like Marx, you think that it is our material condition that first creates certain ideas in our head, then you are a materialist. So Marx would tell us, show me what your material condition is, where eventually he would say, show me where in the class structure you are, and I will tell you what ideas are there in your mind. So that's the essential difference between idealist and materialist. Marx is taking Hegel's notion of alienation, estrangement. There are various words, and all of these are translations from German, into the material realm, because that's the realm he believes one can actually make a difference. The other person he draws the notion of alienation from is Feuerbach. Feuerbach, in his manuscript, The Essence of Christianity, challenges the idea that God created humans or God created the world. And in order to explain that idea, I have put up the very famous Michelangelo painting, The Birth of Adam, from the 16th century, to say that in Feuerbach's argument, he says that humans are alienated and then they project that alienation onto the idea of God in order to reconcile the human condition, which is an alienated one. They create the idea of God, and onto that God they project all that is good, and in that doing so they alienate themselves even more. But he stops here, and Marx is not in agreement with the notion that, while he says that yes, God is a human creation, but he says that just getting rid of the idea of the God is not going to create a world where the human condition is not an alienated one. So what do we need to do? And here I quote from Marx's introduction, a contribution to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, a manuscript that he wrote, never published, but the introduction is quite central to the argument here. It is the immediate task of philosophy, which is in the service of history, to unmask self-estrangement in its unholy forms. So here it's not just the religious forms, in its unholy forms, once the holy form of human self-estrangement has been unmasked. So Feuerbach has unmasked the holy form. Now we need to go forward and unmask the unholy forms of estrangement and alienation. Thus, the criticism of heaven turns into a criticism of earth, the criticism of religion into the criticism of law, and the criticism of theology into the criticism of politics. So he's very clearly wanting to bring the idea of alienation right here into the material world, into the way society is organized, and into the way the capitalist process is functioning. So there's one more idea that I want us to introduce here, which also goes back to Hegel and the young Hegelians, and that is that once we are able to get rid of this estrangement and alienation, and in Hegel is also observing the society of his time, and he sees that There are two emerging classes. There is the capitalist class and there is the proletariats and the working classes. And both of them have very particularistic interests. And because they both have very particularistic interests, they are always in conflict with each other. So he writes that you need another class, a universal class, which can mediate between the two, and therefore create a society where the particularistic classes are not the ones that are representing humanity. So in Hegel's sense, it is the state. It is the state which is the universal class. It is the civil servants that are to do the job of the universal class. Marx says that the state only pretends, it only appears as the universal class. It can never be the universal class. And this is something that we also see. I mean, even though in theory we would agree with the idea, right, that it is the state which needs to, especially in a democracy, it is the state which needs to represent our views, and it needs to act in the general will or the common good, and that is the notion we all hold. But when we try to put together and compare what the notion that we hold with the reality, we know that there are interest groups and there are influencers and corporations and all of that has a role to play. So while we all might have an equal vote, we do not necessarily have an equal voice with the state. So that's the idea. So then Marx says, then who will be the universal class? And he argues that the universal class will be the proletariat. Now, the rest of this discussion on alienation is on, if the proletariat will be the universal class, how do we justify that they would want to be the universal class, and why would the proletariat create a revolution and create a society where they would be the universal class? So there he says that the human condition is an estranged one, it's an alienated one, but the class that will realize that they are alienated is the proletariat, and therefore it is in their interest to emancipate, to throw that cloak out which is oppressive, and to create a society where they would represent the common good. So that's one of the reasons where he is heading towards more of a description of what alienation is and what are the different kinds of alienation that are. So he gives us 4 different types of alienation, and we will go over one by one. So the first kind of alienation that happens in the capitalist society, especially with factory work, is alienation from the object of production. Now let's go back to times when there were artisans, artisans creating beautiful objects, or like a potter creating a pot, or a weaver weaving a sari, or a cobbler making a shoe. Well, you would associate yourself with the product of your labor, right? You would, if there is a potter, they can be very proud of the fact that they've created such a beautiful pot, or a weaver can proudly acclaim that this lovely sari and the pattern and the colors chosen and the threads woven, this is my piece of work, right? This is my creation. Well, that doesn't happen when we go to the factory. You saw that in the Charlie Chaplin clip that I showed you there. Each one is doing one bit of the work, and the object that they produce is not theirs to claim as their own. So that's the first alienation that Marx is talking about. And he writes in economic and philosophical manuscripts. And there are several sections in this manuscript on wage, on rent, on private property. And then he comes to estranged labor. And this is from that section on estranged labor. He writes, the object which labor produces, labor's product, confronts it as something alien, as a power independent of the producer, We see in today's times, if we look at a Toyota car with all its, or any other car of any other manufacturer, different parts are produced in different parts of the world. Workers don't even come face to face with each other. And who would say who made the car, let alone claim it as one's own piece of art or creation? The product of labor is labor which has been embodied in an object, which has become material. It is the objectification of labor. So one thing that the laborer is producing in this whole process is also the laborer themselves as a commodity, right? This is unique to capitalism, where laboring is an act of commodification, of objectification. Labor's realization is its objectification, he writes. And this is the first form of alienation that Marx talks about. The second form of alienation that Marx writes about, again in the same section, is alienation from the process of production. We can again refer back to that clip of Charlie Chaplin, where each one is doing just that one bit of work. You are paid for your 9-to-5 job. What one is told to do in that 9-to-5 job is what you're supposed to do. And you don't really have a say in how your labor is to be used. So the labor, which is actually such an integral part of the human condition, becomes external to the worker. And he writes that the fact that labor is external to the worker, that is, it does not belong to his intrinsic nature, that in his work, therefore, he does not affirm himself but denies himself, does not feel content but unhappy, does not develop freely his physical and mental energy, but mortifies his body and ruins his mind. The worker, therefore, only feels himself outside his work, and his work feels outside himself. We go to work, we have work. Nowadays, we talk about work-life balance. These are not integrated concepts in capitalism. You don't work because work is giving you the energy to live, or it is giving you the joy or the creativity of what it means to be a human. You work so that you may get the resources that you need in order to live. That's a fundamental difference in how the notion of work or labor changes in the capitalist mode of production. He's not yet using the capitalist mode of production in these texts. He's still very much in the more humanities realm when he's writing all this. And then when he moves into the notion of exploitation, he gets more into the social science realm. This is Marx the philosopher telling us about the human condition under capitalism. The worker, therefore, only feels himself outside his work, and in his work feels outside himself. He feels at home when he is not working, and when he is working, he does not feel at home. And this is the condition I think most people in today's time will also relate to. Fundamental insights he's giving us in the way economy is structuring society in modern times. All right, the third kind of alienation that he talks about is alienation from the species being. And here, let's go through this piece by piece. So Marx, in this section, he also brings in nature. Humans are part of nature, but they are also drawing from nature, and they are consciously drawing from nature, right? So while an animal might also be partaking of nature, nature's gifts or nature's resources in order to survive, humans do that much more consciously and imaginatively. So he says that is where we are different from, let's say, bees. So bees also make a hive, but human beings first imagine their architecture, they first imagine their home. It is first in their mind, and then they gather the resources from nature, and then they go ahead and build it. This is this kind of creative imagination is central to what distinguishes the human condition or the species being from that of animals. That's the distinguishing factor. So he writes, the animal is immediately one with its life activity. It does not distinguish itself from it. It is its life activity. Man makes his life activity itself the object of his will and his consciousness. So I will it, and then I make it happen in the way I will it, right? So that's the distinguishing factor. However, what happens on the factory floor? You are doing work not because you want to do it that way. You're doing work as you've been told to do. So for labor, life activity, productive life activity itself appears to man in the first place merely as a means of satisfying a need, not of deriving joy or happiness, the need to maintain physical existence. Yet the productive life is the life of the species. It is life engendering life. The whole character of a species, its species character, is contained in the character of its life activity. And free conscious activity is man's species character. But for labor, life itself appears only as a means to life. You work in order that you can go home and maybe live, right? So that is a very strong form of alienation that characterizes the modern society that Marx is writing about. Again, from the same section. The fourth form of alienation, he says, is alienation from fellow men. And he writes, an immediate consequence of the fact that man is estranged from the product of his labor, from his life activity, from his species being, is the estrangement of man, from one to another. When man confronts himself, he confronts the other man. So the other man becomes objectified. And again, this is a concept that I think all of us will relate to in numerous ways. I mean, very obviously at your age, let's say the idea of competition itself. There is the sense that there are so many of us and I have to distinguish myself from the rest, and so everybody else is in competition with me, and that really estranges you from all others, and the possibility of cooperation gets really reduced. There is also the notion of surplus labor, which comes later in Marx, but the sense that so many others are also waiting for the same job, and therefore you are kind of distinct from them, so that they may not come up and take your job. So again, a division from fellow men. And there are multiple ways, that one can think of how all of these alienations are leading humanity to be estranged or alienated from fellow men. So these are the four basic ideas that he gives in terms of the four different types of alienation. Now, for the working class worker, it's quite apparent. But he's also saying that it is not that the capitalist is not alienated. The capitalist is also alienated from the species being. The capitalist is also alienated from other fellow men. The competition amongst capitalists to produce more, to accumulate more, the never-ending drive of accumulation also pushes the capitalist towards doing more and more, but not so much for their own enjoyment, for their own creative pursuit, but for the sake of accumulation. And that creates alienation. But then Marx says that the capitalist is not the one who will realize that alienation and revolt, because he's very much higher in the hierarchy, and he is also the one who is drawing the fruits of other people's labor. But the proletariat, the working class, is the one who would realize that we are alienated, and it is from this alienation that the revolution will come and a more collective society can be formed. So I end today's class here and see you in the next lecture on Marx. Thanks.